Do you have a self-defense game plan? My name is Joe, and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel, I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects. Today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about my self-defense game plan that I've formulated over the years in keeping with the theme of the channel, which is books. A lot of this information has come from various authors like Jeff Thompson, Rory Miller, Kevin Secor, Ian Abernethy, several others. Basically, we're looking at a general game plan for what I would say covers many, but definitely not all self-defense scenarios. We are assuming that we are facing one aggressor. We are assuming that they are not initially armed. We are assuming that we are able to move to a place of safety. So this will not cover things like I'm being ambushed in my car. This will not cover things necessarily like I'm facing two or more attackers or I'm trying to protect someone. So I have to take them into consideration as I'm addressing the threat. But this will address many different scenarios that people can encounter. Now, one of the influences here is the book Mastering Jiu-Jitsu by Renzo Gracie and John Danaher, in which they address 3 phases of combat. The first is the free movement phase, which in our scenario is what I'm trying to get to so that I can effect moving to an area of safety. But free movement is when the combatants are on their feet but not in contact with one another. Then there's the clinch, which is where both combatants are on their feet but tied up in some sort of contact. And then there's the ground phase, where one or both people are on the ground. And again, we are looking at this from the perspective of, my primary objective is to get to an area of safety. I'm not trying to win a fight. I'm not trying to go for an armbar from the guard. What I'm trying to do is to create a situation where I am no longer under threat of physical violence. And in this situation, we need sub-game plans for each of those 3 phases of combat. Now, we begin in the free movement phase. A lot of self-defense experts will talk about the interview phase. Whether it is social violence or asocial violence, usually an aggressor will try to sort of feel you out by engaging one in conversation. And if I feel threatened, what we go to is what Jeff Thompson refers to as the fence, which is a physical barrier. I prefer something referred to as the staggered fence, because to me this is closer to a fighting stance that I would take up if I needed to. But the purpose of the fence is to keep the opponent or aggressor away. Number one, while we're trying to figure out, how is this going to play out? Is this something that I can de-escalate? Is this something that I can talk my way out of? But also gives us time to respond to them and gives us time to preempt if we need to. Now, the fence in and of itself shouldn't be a static position. There should be talking hands. Like I said, I prefer the staggered fence, but I need to be engaging my hands in sort of a natural way while I'm talking to this aggressor. One of those positions could be the so-called prayer position that we find in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They are looking to get inside control if the aggressor moves forward. Both are pretty good ideas. Mr. Thompson generally prefers a preemptive strike. Again, the goal here is not to win a fight. It is, to put it briefly, stun and run. I'm trying to discombobulate the opponent to the point where it gives me an opportunity to again move to an area of safety, and they are no longer able to effect violence against me, at least for a moment. Now, Mr. Thompson usually shows single shots, and I appreciate and respect that. His idea is to get a knockout, usually with a punch or open hand strike of some sort. For me, I don't like to train for single strikes. I don't want to rely on, I hit him once, and if it doesn't work, then what do I do, right? So my personal default is boxing combinations. Here we see my personal favorite, the cross hook cross. I have also played around with the straight blast from Jeet Kune Do. And from influence of military combatives, in this case specifically World War II combatives, I've been influenced to mess around with open hand strikes, usually while you're marching up the guy's center with knees. And again, the idea isn't necessarily to win a fight. If I can get a knockout, that's great. But if I can get the guy to turn away and cower, that gives me an opportunity to leave for a better place. So I'm going to take that opportunity. I don't need to sit there and wait for him to turn back around and like, okay, we're in a fight now. You know, that's not the objective. Stun and run, that's all I'm looking for. Now that's the preemptive game plan. A lot of times we have to have a reactive game plan in case the aggressor moves before we're prepared. There are generally two approaches to that. The first is the one that I prefer, which is cover and crash, which is sort of what it sounds like. You cover up your head in some way, shape, or form, and you burst into the opponent. The idea being that you can stop their momentum, knock them back, get in too close for them to use the big wide swings. From here, you see the double arm cover, which is sort of my default. Also have played around with the cross arm cover from boxing. There have been other shapes from arts like Silat and Panantukan that I've also messed around with, but those are generally the ones that I default to. Now the other option is what I'm going to call framing. I don't know if it has another name. I've seen something similar with the idea of Tony Blauer's spear. Instead of necessarily bringing your arms in and covering, you're extending them outward. One will go to the opponent's center, at least one, and often another will be used to block or cover against an incoming strike. I prefer this less, and I'll get to that in a second, but my defaults here are the supported punch that we see from Silat, and here we see it crashing in. And I've also seen various frames from karate kata, like this from the Pinan series, where I can see usefulness of crashing in with one while covering with the other. Now the reason I don't like this is that it sets one up for an outside collar tie or a head control and control of the near arm. Control the near arm is good. I prefer control over the far arm as well, and we'll get to that in the next section when I talk about the clinch. As far as the clinch goes, my general priority is safety first. So once we have crashed in, usually with the elbows below the guy's shoulders so we can begin to go for wrestling style clinches, I prefer to position myself on the aggressor's right side between his arm and his waistband. That way, if he hasn't deployed a weapon yet and he needs to get to it, it'll probably be on his waistband and my body's going to be in the way. I also prefer to use a high underhook from this position, and a far bicep control on the other arm as illustrated here. Once safety has been established, then one can use strikes to discombobulate the opponent. Again, that sort of goes back to the idea of stun and run. One can also use grappling maneuvers to cause separation with the opponent, optimally putting them on the ground with you still standing and giving you a chance to again move to a place of safety. Now, the clinch is sort of a wild animal. It's sort of a dogfight, so you need to learn how to control it. My personal controls tend to be primarily from as well as wrestling. There's going to be some influence from Dumog, which is the grappling component of Filipino martial arts. As well as some maneuvers influenced by karate kata, like we see here. On occasion, I have used standing locks that one would find in traditional Japanese grappling arts. I haven't really gotten any sort of finish from these, but usually I use them to strip off the grips or to disrupt the opponent's balance. Now the striking component I use from here, primarily it is knees and elbows from Muay Thai. Headbutts and shoulder butts from Panantukan, which is the empty hand striking component of Filipino martial arts. Forearm strikes from Panantukan as well as karate. And open hand strikes from karate as well as military combatives. Occasionally, I will employ these low choppy kicks to the lower leg. Those aren't necessarily meant to finish or discombobulate the opponent. Those are meant more to disrupt their balance or draw their attention away from something else I'm doing. Those mostly are influenced by military combatives. For the grappling component, most of the throws, dumps, and sweeps that I've got from here come from Muay Thai. From Greco-Roman wrestling. And from Judo. And again, the idea with the throws and dumps is to put the opponent down and away from you so that you can create an opportunity to move to a place of safety. Unlike what you'll see in many sporting events, the objective is not to follow them to the ground and continue the fight down there. This is also the position where you might see some disarms because we are tied up with the opponent. The disarms that I'm most familiar with come from the Filipino martial arts. As well as Krav Maga. This is also the range where it would be possible to execute chokes. Now the chokes can either use the opponent's clothing, as illustrated here, or several chokes do not require the opponent's clothing. The thing about chokes is that you can pretty much guarantee unconsciousness in a matter of seconds. The downside is that they take several seconds to execute, and usually you need to release some control over the opponent before you execute them. So they might not have a gun when you begin your choke, and then they reach for one when you do. There are other things to take into consideration as well. We need to consider being able to defend our actions in a court of law, and chokeholds and strangles are generally considered lethal force maneuvers, so one should be cautious as to their application. Finally, we get to the ground component. What game plan do we have for the ground? Well, when I think of the ground in a self-defense scenario, again, my main objective is to remove myself from a violent situation and get to a place of safety. So primarily, I'm seeing myself as someone who's been put on the ground. Maybe I've tripped, maybe I've been knocked down, maybe I've been thrown. When it comes to escaping from pins, like chest-to-chest sort of pins, I haven't found anything better than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for that. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, generally one is going to try to escape from a pinning position into a position called the guard, where one can control the opponent with their legs from the bottom position. The guard is a pretty good position. We can see here that it can be used to defend against strikes. If you're going to be on the bottom, you want to be in the guard. There are variations of the guard that I personally prefer, like half guard and butterfly guard. I think these positions give me a better opportunity to move my opponent's hips and get back to my feet. And that is the objective here. Again, we're trying to escape the ground, not fight on the ground. Now, if you find yourself on the ground and the opponent's standing over you, the most instinctive thing to go for are bicycle kicks, here illustrated from a book on Krav Maga. These are kicks usually aimed at the opponent's lower body, but they're designed to get you space so that, again, you can stand up. And if the opponent happens to crowd in close so that you don't have range for your kicks, we turn again to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where they use any number of sweeps versus a standing opponent to put the attacker on the ground and give you the chance to get back to your feet and, again, move to a place of safety. And finally, other considerations. If I happen to deploy a weapon, whether it's one that I have on me or one in the environment, most of my influence comes from Filipino martial arts. As well as military combatives. I will say if I happen to deploy something like a staff, that's going to be from my karate/kobudo background because we use the bow in my karate class. So that's my general game plan. Again, everything is sort of predicated on the idea that I need to remove myself from a violent situation, usually through the other guy. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. There are many scenarios I'm sure you guys can think of that this doesn't cover, but this will cover a lot of common scenarios that one will find oneself in. I wish I could have demoed them, but you have the pictures from the books to illustrate them. And what is your self-defense game plan, if you have one? And what holes can you poke in mine? Because I'm sure there's going to be those comments. Anyway, thank you for watching. That's all I have for now, and I'll see you around.